I never thought I'd be one of those men. The kind who watches their world unravel in slow motion, unable to stop it. But here I am, reliving the moment everything I thought I knew was ripped away. It started subtly, with changes so small they could have been dismissed as nothing. My wife, Lisa, worked as an executive assistant in a high-powered law firm. Late nights and last-minute meetings had always been a part of her life. I understood that, or I thought I did. We'd been married for 8 years, and I prided myself on trusting her, on believing in the foundation of honesty and love we'd built together. But then came the phone call she'd taken the other room, the sudden need to stay late at the office more often, and a shift in how she looked at me. If she looked at me at all, she was always distracted. Her laughter felt forced, and the light that used to spark in her eyes when she saw me was dimming. I brushed it off, telling myself that her stress was normal. Her boss was demanding, her workload was immense, and I was being paranoid. She had always been ambitious. This was just part of the package. One night, after she'd come home late again, I noticed her avoiding my touch. It stung, but I still didn't want to believe something was wrong. "Long day?" I asked gently. She nodded without meeting my gaze and excused herself to the shower. It wasn't the first time I felt like I was talking to a stranger, but it wasn't until I found the receipt that I realized my world might be falling apart. It was crumpled at the bottom of her purse, dated 2 nights earlier. A receipt for an upscale restaurant across town. The problem? I'd been home with our kids that night while Lisa claimed she was working late. And it wasn't the kind of place you'd go for a quick bite alone or with coworkers. I sat in our bedroom, clutching that slip of paper, my mind racing. Was it nothing? A dinner meeting she hadn't mentioned? Or was it something darker? I wanted to confront her right then, but fear gripped me. What if I was wrong? Worse, what if I wasn't? The receipt burned a hole in my mind for days. Every time I looked at Lisa, the words printed on that slip whispered doubts into my ears. A dinner for 2. An expensive bottle of wine. It was too intimate, too deliberate to dismiss as a business expense. But I needed proof, something concrete. I wasn't going to let paranoia destroy my marriage if there was still a chance I was wrong. So, I waited. I started paying closer attention to her habits, looking for any cracks in her story. Her phone was the first thing I noticed. She was never without it. She used to leave it charging in the kitchen at night, but now it was always on her nightstand or tucked into her purse. If I ever reached for it, even casually, she'd tense up, as if I were holding something forbidden. Then there were the text messages. She had notifications turned off for most apps, but I'd catch the screen lighting up at odd hours. Once, as we sat on the couch watching TV, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her lips twitching into the briefest smile before she quickly flipped it face down. "Who's that?" I asked, forcing my tone to sound casual. "Just work stuff," she replied, not meeting my eyes. I nodded, pretending to believe her. But the seed of doubt had already sprouted, its roots burrowing deep into my chest. The turning point came the following week. Lisa had another late night at the office. "Don't wait up," she'd said, kissing me on the cheek. Her perfume lingered in the air long after she was gone, sweet and mocking. That evening, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where she should have been. The silence was deafening. Finally, I picked up her laptop. It was an old one she rarely used anymore, but I'd seen her log into her email on it once, so I figured it was worth a shot. Her inbox was clean, almost too clean, but her sent folder told a different story. Buried among work-related emails was a string of messages to someone named JR. They weren't explicit, but the tone was unmistakable, warm, personal, intimate. There was a familiarity in the way she wrote to him, a comfort that stung more than anything else. I read one line over and over until it felt seared into my brain. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was unforgettable." My stomach dropped. This wasn't work. This wasn't stress. This was something else entirely. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lisa in that restaurant, laughing with someone who wasn't me. My mind painted vivid pictures of her leaning in close, whispering secrets, sharing smiles that used to be mine. The next morning, she was her usual self, calm, collected, and oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. She kissed me goodbye as she left for work, her smile as effortless as ever. I stood at the door, watching her drive away, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending. It was time to find out the truth. The decision to follow Lisa wasn't easy. It felt wrong, invasive, like I was crossing a line I could never uncross. But that email replayed in my head like a broken record. Last night was unforgettable. The words weren't just a betrayal. They were a challenge, daring me to uncover the truth. That Friday, she told me she had a late meeting followed by drinks with her team. It wasn't unusual for her to have these kinds of evenings, so I played along. "Don't work too hard," I said, kissing her cheek as she left. Inside, my stomach churned. After she drove off, I grabbed my keys and waited a few minutes before following her. I felt like some sort of amateur detective, nerves twisting tighter with every turn. I stayed several cars behind, thankful for the evening rush that masked my pursuit. Lisa drove across town, not toward her office but toward a district filled with upscale bars and restaurants. She parked in front of a boutique hotel, its glowing sign a cruel beacon in the dim light. I pulled into a spot a block away, my pulse hammering in my ears as I watched her. She stepped out of the car, her phone pressed to her ear. Her expression was lit with something I hadn't seen in years: excitement. She looked around, scanning the area, before walking inside. She wasn't meeting colleagues. I knew that much. I waited, debating my next move. Part of me wanted to storm in and confront her on the spot. But what if I was wrong? What if this was innocent, and I ended up humiliating both of us? An hour passed before I made my decision. I walked into the lobby, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure the receptionist could hear it. I stayed near the back, watching as a man approached the front desk. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and confident in a way that made my skin crawl. He handed the receptionist a credit card, then leaned casually against the counter, chatting as he waited. When he turned slightly, I caught a glimpse of his face and froze. It was her boss, David Fletcher, the man Lisa worked for, the one she always described as demanding but fair, the man who supposedly made her life a whirlwind of stress and late nights. I watched as the receptionist handed him a key card and gestured toward the elevators. A moment later, Lisa appeared from around the corner, her face lighting up when she saw him. They exchanged a brief glance, a smile, and then walked to the elevator together. I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt rooted to the ground, and the air seemed too thick to breathe. As the elevator doors closed, the reality of it all hit me. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It wasn't paranoia or insecurity. It was betrayal. I walked out of the hotel in a daze, barely noticing the world around me. The anger came later, burning through the numbness like a wildfire. This wasn't just about an affair. It was about the lies, the manipulation, the way she'd made me feel like I was the one losing touch when all along, it was her. I drove home that night with one thought on my mind. She doesn't get to do this to me. If Lisa wanted to burn our life to the ground, I'd make sure she went down in the flames. The drive home felt endless, every streetlight blurring into the next as anger and hurt tangled into a knot in my chest. By the time I reached our driveway, my hands were trembling on the wheel. I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the car, staring at the house we had built together, the place that held so many memories. I wondered how long Lisa had been turning those memories into lies. When I finally stepped inside, the silence felt oppressive. Our kids were at my parents' for the weekend, something Lisa had arranged. She claimed it was to give us some alone time, but now I realized it was likely to make her affair easier to hide. I poured myself a drink, pacing the living room as I tried to calm the storm inside me. My mind churned through every possibility. Should I confront her? Walk away? Pretend I didn't know? None of it felt right. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd made me doubt myself, question my instincts, and lose sleep over feelings she made me believe were irrational. She didn't deserve to get away with this. By the time I finished my drink, the beginnings of a plan were forming. If Lisa wanted to play games, I'd make sure the final move was mine. The next morning, I started gathering information. I scoured her laptop, her emails, her social media accounts, anything that might give me insight into her double life. It didn't take long to find what I needed. There were more emails between her and David, each one more damning than the last. They spoke in code, but the meaning was clear. Meetings at the usual spot. Cryptic references to late nights. One email even included an itinerary for an upcoming trip to a legal conference. She wasn't just cheating, she was flaunting it. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and fury as I compiled everything into a folder on my laptop. I wasn't just planning revenge, I was building a case. Over the next few days, I worked in secret. I installed a GPS tracker on her car and set up a discreet app on her phone to monitor her messages. I didn't feel guilty about it, not after what I'd seen. If Lisa was going to shatter our trust, I'd use the pieces to cut her lies apart. By the end of the week, I had enough evidence to confront her, or destroy her, if it came to that. Photos, texts, call logs, even receipts from hotels and dinners she claimed were work-related. But I wasn't ready to make my move just yet. Timing was everything, and I needed her to feel as comfortable as possible before I pulled the rug out from under her. When Friday came, Lisa acted as if everything was normal. She kissed me goodbye that morning, her smile as effortless as ever. "I'll be home late," she said casually. "David's having us review a new case tonight." I nodded, hiding the bile rising in my throat. "Sounds intense. Don't work too hard." She laughed, oblivious to the truth burning behind my eyes. "I won't." The second she left, I started preparing for what would be the most important night of my life. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make sure she never forgot what she did to me. That Friday evening, the house felt like a ticking time bomb. I checked and rechecked everything I'd prepared. My hands steady but my heart racing. Lisa didn't suspect a thing. She thought she had me fooled, still tucked comfortably in the lies she'd spun. By the time her car pulled into the driveway, I was sitting on the couch, my laptop open on the coffee table. I debated whether to confront her then or wait until I had even more evidence, but my patience had run out. Tonight was the night. "Hey," she called as she walked through the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "You're up late." I glanced at her, feigning indifference. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." Lisa's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly, setting her purse down and slipping off her shoes. "Long day. I'm exhausted." "Late meeting with David again?" I asked, my tone carefully neutral. She nodded, not even flinching at the mention of his name. "Yeah, he's been piling so much on me lately." I stared at her for a long moment, and she shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tinged with nervous laughter. "Nothing," I said, leaning back on the couch. "I was just thinking about us. About how much I've trusted you all these years." Her expression changed, her guard coming up. "What are you talking about?" I picked up my laptop and turned it toward her. On the screen was a slideshow of her text messages with David, the emails I'd uncovered, and photos from the GPS tracker. Her face drained of color as she realized what she was looking at. "Care to explain?" I asked, my voice calm but icy. Lisa didn't move. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Finally, she stammered, I can explain. It's not what it looks like." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Not what it looks like. Lisa, I've spent the past week gathering evidence because I couldn't believe the woman I married could betray me like this. But here it is, right in front of me. So, go ahead. Explain." Tears welled in her eyes, and she sank into the armchair across from me. "I made a mistake," she whispered. It was just one time. It didn't mean anything." I raised an eyebrow, scrolling to another email. "One time? Then how do you explain this? Or this? Or the hotel receipts?" She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I'm sorry, okay? I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't mean to hurt you." Her words were like salt in an open wound. "You didn't mean to hurt me? Lisa, you lied to me, to our family. You betrayed everything we built together. And you didn't think I'd find out?" She looked up at me, her eyes desperate. "Please, we can fix this. I'll stop, I swear. I love you. I got caught up in something I couldn't control." I stood, my fists clenched at my sides. "You didn't get caught up, Lisa. You made choices. Over and over again. You chose him. You chose to lie, to cheat, to destroy everything we had." She reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't, I said sharply. Don't touch me. I can't even look at you right now. For the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. She knew she was losing control of the situation. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice trembling. I met her gaze, my resolve hard as steel. You'll find out soon enough. But let me make one thing clear. You don't get to walk away from this unscathed. Lisa sobbed harder, but I felt no pity. I had loved her with everything I had, and she had thrown it away. Now it was her turn to feel the weight of betrayal. I walked upstairs without another word, leaving her to sit in the wreckage of her lies. Tomorrow, I would set the final pieces of my plan into motion. I didn't sleep much that night, but I didn't need to. My mind was sharp, focused on the steps ahead. Lisa spent the night crying downstairs. I could hear her muffled sobs, but they didn't stir any sympathy in me. She deserved to feel the pain she'd caused, and this was just the beginning. The next morning, she tried to approach me as I sat in the kitchen sipping coffee. Her eyes were puffy and red, her voice hoarse from crying. Can we talk? She asked softly. I looked up from my mug, meeting her gaze with an unflinching stare. There's nothing left to say, Lisa. I know everything. But I love you, she said, her voice breaking. Please, we can work through this. We can fix it. Fix it? I repeated, my tone cold. You didn't just break something, Lisa. You destroyed it. There's no fixing this. She sank into the chair across from me, tears streaming down her face. I made a mistake. I don't know why I did it, but I love you, and I'll do anything to make it right. Her words felt hollow, like a desperate attempt to salvage the life she'd so carelessly thrown away. I didn't respond. Instead, I stood, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door, leaving her to sit in her guilt. I spent the day putting my plan into motion. First, I went to my lawyer. I'd already made copies of all the evidence I'd gathered, emails, texts, photos, and receipts, and handed them over. My lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Angela, reviewed everything with a grim expression. This is airtight, she said, flipping through the documents. She won't have a leg to stand on in court. We'll ensure she walks away with as little as possible. That's all I want, I said. She can have her affair. I just want to make sure she doesn't get to profit from it. Angela nodded. We'll file for divorce immediately. Given the circumstances, you have a strong case for retaining the house and primary custody of the kids. But it'll take time. I clenched my jaw, nodding. Time. That was the one thing I wasn't sure I could endure. But I'd do whatever it took to see this through. Next, I stopped by a private investigator's office to ensure I had every angle covered. The GPS tracker and app on Lisa's phone had given me plenty of evidence, but I wanted more. Something undeniable. The investigator, a grizzled man named Vince, assured me he'd follow Lisa closely and document everything. Don't worry, he said. We'll get you what you need. By the time I got home that evening, I felt like I was finally in control of the situation. Lisa was waiting for me in the living room, looking like a shadow of the woman I'd married. Where were you? She asked, her voice trembling. None of your business, I replied curtly. Please, she said, standing. Don't shut me out. Let's talk. Let me explain. I turned to face her, my expression hard. Explain what? That you've been lying to me for months? That you've been sleeping with your boss while I stayed home, raising our kids and trusting you? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I interrupted. You can't twist this into something else, Lisa. I know who you are now, and I'll make sure you can't hurt me or our kids ever again. She sank back onto the couch, defeated. I walked upstairs without another word, ready to see my plan through to the end. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life and making sure Lisa felt the full weight of what she'd done. The house felt like a battlefield in the days that followed. Lisa and I moved through it like strangers, the tension thick and suffocating. She tried to bridge the gap, cooking dinner, offering small talk, even leaving little notes on the kitchen counter like she used to when we were happy. But I ignored it all. The truth was, I didn't believe a word she said anymore. Her apologies, her promises, they were all meaningless. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd been caught. I spent most of my time preparing for the next steps. The private investigator, Vince, had already sent me the first batch of photos. Lisa and David had met again, this time at a hotel in the middle of the afternoon. The pictures were clear, leaving no room for doubt. I stared at them for hours, my emotions shifting between rage and despair. This was the woman I had built a life with, the mother of my children. And now, she was nothing more than a stranger wrapped in deceit. One evening, while Lisa was out running errands, I sat down with our kids. I hadn't planned to talk to them yet. I wanted to protect them from the fallout for as long as possible, but I couldn't put it off any longer. Bryce, our oldest, was 10. He was sharp, perceptive, and I knew he'd already picked up on the tension. Ellie, at 6, was more innocent, her world still full of the simplicity of childhood. "Hey, guys," I said, sitting on the couch as they played nearby. "Can we talk for a minute?" Bryce looked up from his tablet, his brows furrowed. "What's wrong, Dad?" Ellie climbed into my lap, her small arms wrapping around my neck. "Are you sad?" she asked, her big eyes full of concern. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "A little," I admitted. "But I want you both to know something. No matter what happens, I love you, and I'll always be here for you." Bryce frowned. "Is this about Mom? You guys have been fighting a lot." I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Your mom and we're going through some hard times right now, but I promise, we're both going to do what's best for you." Ellie's grip tightened around my neck. "Are you and Mommy mad at each other?" I hugged her close, my chest aching. "A little, sweetie. But it's not your fault. None of this is your fault." Bryce watched me carefully, his expression unreadable. "Are you getting divorced?" His question hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to lie, to shield them from the truth for just a little longer, but I couldn't. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But no matter what happens, we'll always be a family." They both seemed to accept my answer, though Bryce's silence worried me. He was old enough to understand more than I gave him credit for, and I hated that he had to deal with this at all. When Lisa came home later that night, I told her I'd spoken to the kids. Her face fell, guilt flashing in her eyes. "You didn't tell them about us, did you?" "Not yet," I said coldly. "But they deserve to know what's coming. And when they do, you'll only have yourself to blame." She opened her mouth to argue, but thought better of it. Instead, she turned away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of what my plan was doing to her. She looked broken, fragile, like the weight of her actions was finally sinking in. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I was just getting started. Lisa's facade began to crack after that night. She was no longer the confident, composed woman I'd married, or the one who had lied to my face with such ease. Every day, she seemed more frazzled, her nerves fraying as the distance between us grew. I continued to keep her in the dark about what I was planning, and she grew increasingly paranoid. She knew something was coming, but not when or how. One evening, while I was working in my home office, she knocked on the door. Her voice was soft, tentative. "Can we talk?" I glanced up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing a message from Angela, my lawyer. "What do you want, Lisa?" She stepped inside, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. I want to know if there's still a chance for us. If there's anything I can do to fix this." Her words might have moved me weeks ago, but now they rang hollow. "Why?" I asked, my tone sharp. "Is David not working out the way you'd hoped?" She flinched at his name, tears pooling in her eyes. "It's not like that," she whispered. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I love you. I don't want to lose you." "Love?" I scoffed, standing up. "You don't love me, Lisa. You love the idea of me, the stability I gave you, the life I built for you while you snuck around with your boss." "That's not fair," she said, her voice rising. I was lost. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore. And he made me feel seen. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "So what? That excuses everything? The lies? The betrayal? You think I didn't feel invisible when you stopped looking at me? When you started hiding your phone and working late? But I didn't cheat, Lisa. I didn't throw away our marriage because things got hard. She broke down then, collapsing into the chair across from my desk, sobbing. I'm sorry, she said over and over. I'm so sorry. I didn't comfort her. I didn't have it in me. Instead, I walked to the door and opened it. Go to bed, Lisa. I have work to do. She hesitated, searching my face for any sign of forgiveness. When she didn't find it, she stood and left, her sobs echoing down the hallway. As soon as she was gone, I sat back down and opened the file Vince had sent me earlier that day. It was more photos. Lisa and David meeting at a coffee shop, their heads bent close together as they laughed and whispered. It made my stomach churn, but it was exactly what I needed. The next step in my plan was already in motion. Angela had filed the divorce papers, and Vince had gathered enough evidence to ensure Lisa wouldn't walk away with anything more than the clothes on her back. But I wasn't just planning to end our marriage. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to know what it felt like to lose everything. I spent the next few days preparing for what I called the reckoning. Lisa thought she was just facing a divorce, but she had no idea how far I was willing to go to make sure she paid for her betrayal. The reckoning was coming, and when it did, she'd have no one to blame but herself. The day I'd been waiting for finally arrived. It started like any other, quiet and unassuming. Lisa left for work, probably believing she still had time to sway me or repair the damage. But her time had run out. I dressed in my best suit and gathered the meticulously organized folder of evidence I'd been compiling. Angela had everything ready to file, but today wasn't just about legal proceedings. It was about exposing the truth. My first stop was Lisa's office. I'd arranged a meeting with her HR department under the guise of discussing a business opportunity. When I arrived, I made sure to hand over the evidence of Lisa and David's affair, including the photos of them meeting during work hours and using company resources to further their relationship. The HR director, a stern woman in her late 40s, listened quietly as I explained the situation. Her expression grew colder with every piece of evidence I presented. We have a strict code of conduct here, she said. This is a serious breach. I thought you'd want to know, I replied, standing to leave. I'll leave it to you to decide how to proceed. As I walked out of the office, I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. Lisa had jeopardized her career for David, and now it was all falling apart. That evening, I waited for Lisa to come home. When she walked through the door, her face was pale, her hands trembling. She knew something had happened. Did you go to my office? She demanded, her voice shaking. I nodded calmly. I did. They deserve to know about the affair. She collapsed into a chair, her face crumpling as tears streamed down her cheeks. You've ruined me, she whispered. No, Lisa, I said coldly. You ruined yourself. I'm just making sure the consequences catch up with you. She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. Please, don't do this. We can fix things. For the kids, for us, please. I leaned in close, my voice like ice. There's no us anymore. And as for the kids, they deserve better than a mother who lies and cheats. The next day, Angela filed the divorce papers. I made sure Lisa was served at work, where the humiliation would sting the most. The papers outlined every detail of her affair, supported by evidence that ensured I would retain custody of the kids and keep the house. Lisa called me in a panic as soon as she received them. You can't do this to me, she screamed. I'll fight you in court. Good luck, I replied. You won't win. Breaking the news to the kids was the hardest part. I sat them down one evening, explaining as gently as I could that their mom and I were getting a divorce. Bryce, ever perceptive, nodded solemnly. Ellie burst into tears, clinging to me as I reassured her that I'd always be there for her. Lisa tried to smooth things over, but the damage was done. Bryce refused to speak to her, and Ellie hid behind me whenever Lisa came near. It broke my heart to see them hurting, but I knew this was the only way forward. Word of Lisa's affair spread quickly. Her friends, many of whom had suspected something was going on, distanced themselves. At work, the HR department demoted her, citing a breach of ethics, and she was forced to take a significant pay cut. David didn't come to her defense. In fact, he transferred to another office to escape the fallout. Lisa was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life alone, I filed a restraining order, preventing Lisa from introducing the kids to anyone she was romantically involved with. It wasn't difficult to prove that her lifestyle wasn't conducive to their well-being. The court sided with me, granting full custody and limiting her visitation rights. Lisa begged me to reconsider, but I didn't relent. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal. I focused on rebuilding my life with the kids, creating a stable and loving home for them. Lisa, meanwhile, struggled to regain her footing. She moved into a small apartment across town, her once glamorous life reduced to the bare minimum. Occasionally, she'd call, asking to talk, but I never answered. I'd given her everything, my trust, my love, my devotion, and she'd thrown it all away. Now, I was finally free, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Lisa had lost everything. And I had everything that truly mattered. My kids, my integrity, and the promise of a future she could no longer touch.